She woke up on the cold executive floor, lips split, wrists burning against the mahogany legs of the desk. The air smelled of expensive cologne, ozone from the printers, and sharp, metallic fear. Zora didn't scream. Screaming failed her once, and the glass walls of the penthouse learned her silence first. The corporate barn, that's what the newspapers called this high-rise, was a place of patient, calm violence where time breaks apart when fear stays too long. Her husband, Elias, the city's most influential businessman, had put her life aside like a chore already finished. He believed the law was on his side, that money could erase anything, even a wife who knew too much. He slept fine that night, while Zora lay bound in the darkness, erased quietly by a man who thought he owned her like he owned his deeds and land grants. The building itself seemed to be exhaling fear. Kande felt it the moment his designer boots crunched over broken glass in the lobby. He'd bought this territory for almost nothing during the hostile takeover, a clean corporate war fought with signatures and wire transfers, not bullets. At least, that's what his lawyers promised. But the silence inside the high-rise was wrong. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty building. It was the kind of silence that comes after something unspeakable, when even the air holds its breath. His men fanned out through the lower floors, securing exits and checking for stragglers from Elias's security team. Kande took the executive elevator alone. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a place to breathe. Tombstone had chewed him up and spit him out, and this city, this clean, corporate jungle, was supposed to be different. A place to reinvent himself. A place to hide from the violent history that followed him like a shadow. This is a story about a horror worse than anyone could imagine. But it's also about what happens when someone refuses to stay erased. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to stay with us through Zora's journey, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support means everything. Now, let's continue. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that felt obscene in the heavy silence. The executive floor stretched before him, a maze of glass offices and ergonomic chairs, everything bathed in the sickly glow of emergency lighting. Kande moved through it like a ghost, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Not a gun. Never a gun anymore. Guns were loud, and loud meant attention, and attention meant bodies, and bodies meant the kind of quiet he'd been running from his whole life. Then he saw her. At first, he thought she was dead. The woman was crumpled near the corner office, wrists bound to the desk leg with zip ties that had cut deep enough to paint the mahogany dark. Her dress, once expensive, he could tell, was torn at the shoulder. Her face was turned away, dark hair falling like a curtain over her features. But her chest rose and fell. Shallow. Painful. Kande crossed the space in 3 long strides and knelt beside her. His knife was out before he thought about it, the blade catching the emergency light as he sliced through the plastic ties. Her wrists dropped and she gasped, not in relief, but in pain as blood rushed back into her hands. "Don't move," he said quietly, in English rough from disuse. "You're safe." Her eyes opened then, and Kande realized 2 things at once. First, she didn't believe him. Second, she had every reason not to. This woman had been left here like garbage, like something used up and thrown away. The building itself seemed to know it, seemed to be holding the memory of what happened in its glass walls and polished floors. "Who are you?" Her voice was a rasp, broken but not defeated. That impressed him. "Someone who wasn't supposed to find you," Kande answered. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs shook, gave out. He caught her before she hit the floor again, one arm supporting her weight like she was made of paper. She wasn't. He could feel the tension in her body, the coiled spring of someone who had survived something terrible and was still deciding whether to fight or flee. "Elias," she whispered, and the name came out like poison. "My husband. He thinks I'm erased. He thinks I'm just another thing on his list." Kande had heard that name. Elias Mercer. The businessman whose company he'd just gutted in the takeover. The man who'd fought dirty, used legal threats and blackmail, tried every trick in the corporate playbook to keep his empire intact. But this was different. This was the kind of violence that happened in the dark, the kind that powerful men committed because they believed no one would ever know. "He's wrong," Kangdae said, and meant it. "You're not erased. You're standing here. That makes you dangerous." Something flickered in her eyes then. Not hope, not yet. But recognition. She saw him clearly for the first time, not as a rescuer or a threat, but as someone who understood what it meant to be hunted by your own history. "I need to get out of here," she said. "So do I." Kangdae helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "But first, we need to disappear. Your husband has people everywhere. Security cameras, police on his payroll, judges in his pocket. If he finds out you're alive, he'll finish what he started." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. Then she looked at him with those sharp, bruised eyes. "Why are you helping me? You're the man who took his company. You're not supposed to care about his wife." Kangdae smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I'm tired of being the kind of man who doesn't care. Or maybe I just recognize another person who's been thrown away." He turned toward the elevator, still supporting her weight. "Either way, we're leaving. Now." They moved through the building like shadows, Kangdae's men falling in behind them without questions. That's what he paid them for, discretion and loyalty, in that order. By the time they reached the underground garage, Zora was standing on her own, though she kept his jacket wrapped tight around her shoulders like armor. As they drove away from the corporate barn, Kangdae glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Her reflection in the glass looked haunted, but there was something else there too. Something that reminded him of himself when he'd first left Tombstone, bloody and broken but still breathing. The building was exhaling fear, yes. But it was also exhaling a survivor. And Kangdae knew from experience that survivors were the most dangerous people in the world. The safe house wasn't what Zora expected. No underground bunker, no abandoned warehouse with rats and broken windows. Instead, Kangdae brought her to a small apartment above a Korean grocery in the old district, the kind of place the city planners forgot existed. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the air smelled of kinkai and sesame oil, warm and alive in a way that made her chest ache. When had she last been somewhere that felt like people actually lived there? Kangdae unlocked 3 separate deadbolts before pushing the door open. Inside was sparse but clean. A low table, floor cushions, a kitchenette with a rice cooker still plugged in. No television. No computer. Nothing that could track them, nothing that could betray their location. The windows were covered with thick curtains that let in no light from the street below. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the cushions. His voice was softer here, away from the glass tower and its ghosts. "I'll make tea." Zora lowered herself slowly, every muscle screaming. Her wrists were raw, angry red lines where the zip ties had cut deep. She watched Kangdae move through the small kitchen with practiced efficiency, filling a kettle, pulling down ceramic cups. His hands were steady, scarred across the knuckles. Hands that had cut her free. Hands that knew violence intimately but chose gentleness now. "You don't have to do this," she said. Her voice still sounded like gravel, like something broken. "You don't owe me anything." Kangdae didn't turn around. "I know." The kettle began to hiss, a soft sound that filled the silence between them. When he finally sat across from her, placing a cup of green tea in front of her with both hands, his eyes met hers for the first time since they'd arrived. They were dark, almost black, and carried their own weight of things left unsaid. "In Tombstone," he began, then stopped. Started again. "In Tombstone, I was the kind of man who walked away. I saw things that needed fixing and I told myself it wasn't my problem. That's how you survive in that world. You become very good at not seeing." Zora wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her damaged skin. "And now? Now I'm tired of not seeing." He sipped his own tea, grimaced slightly at the temperature. "When I found you tonight, I could have walked away. Told myself you were someone else's problem. But I looked at you and I saw myself. Someone thrown away by people who thought they had the right. She studied him across the small table. This man who'd bought a building in a hostile takeover, who dressed in designer clothes and moved like a predator, but who made tea with careful hands and spoke about Tombstone like it was a scar he couldn't stop touching. Elias doesn't think he threw me away, Zora said quietly. He thinks he filed me correctly. Put me exactly where I belong on his list of assets. The penthouse, the cars, the wife who knows when to smile and when to stay silent. Except I stopped being silent. I found his offshore accounts, his blackmail files, everything he's built his empire on. So he decided to refile me. Underdisposed. Kangday's jaw tightened. He left you there to die. No. Zora shook her head, and the movement made her dizzy. He left me there to be erased. Death is too simple, too final. Elias wanted me to disappear completely, like I never existed. Another number in a ledger that doesn't quite add up, but no one looks too closely because the books always balance in the end. She took a shaky sip of tea. He told me I was making things complicated. That I should have just stayed on the list where he put me. The apartment fell into a different kind of silence then. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of the corporate barn, but something softer. Something that made room for breath, for the sound of teacups being set down, for the distant hum of the city outside that couldn't reach them here. Kangday stood and retrieved the first aid kit from a cabinet. He knelt beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean and understated, nothing like Elias's aggressive designer scent that announced his presence before he entered a room. Your wrists, he said simply. She extended her hands, and he began cleaning the wounds with careful precision. His touch was clinical but not cold. Each dab of antiseptic, each wrap of gauze, felt like an apology for every man who'd ever hurt her. When he finished, he sat back on his heels. You have information, he said. The kind that could destroy him. Had. Zora flexed her bandaged hands. Everything was on a drive. He took it before, she stopped, swallowed hard. Before he decided I was disposable. Then we get it back. Kangday said it like it was simple, like stealing from the most powerful man in the city was just another item on a to-do list. You know where he keeps it. His private office. The real one, not the showroom where he meets clients. It's in his estate, 4th floor, behind a painting of his father. She laughed, but it came out bitter. He told me once that his father taught him everything matters less than control. That people are just numbers that need managing. Kangday was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look at the street below. My father taught me that violence is a language, he said to the glass. That if you speak it fluently enough, you never have to say anything else. I spent 20 years in Tombstone proving him right. He let the curtain fall. I came here to prove him wrong. Zora pushed herself to her feet, steadying herself against the wall. Every part of her hurt, but underneath the pain was something else. Something that felt like anger crystallizing into purpose. Then help me prove Elias wrong. Help me show him I'm not just another thing on his list. He turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the safe house, Kangday looked less like a mafia boss and more like what he really was, a man trying to outrun his own shadow. If we do this, there's no going back. He'll come for both of us with everything he has. Good, Zora said, and meant it. Let him come. I'm done being silent. Kangday smiled then, a real smile that touched his eyes and made him look younger, less haunted. Then we start planning tomorrow. Tonight, you rest. You're safe here. As Zora lay down on the small futon he pulled from a closet, wrapped in blankets that smelled like lavender and something else she couldn't name, she realized she believed him. For the first time in years, in this hidden place above a grocery store with a stranger who understood being thrown away, she felt something close to safe. The city hummed beyond the covered windows. Somewhere out there, Elias slept soundly, believing she was erased. But here, in this different kind of silence, Zora began to remember what it felt like to be alive. They found them on the third day. Not with bullets or battering rams, but with paper. Kang Dae was making coffee when his phone buzzed with a message from one of his men. 3 words, they know. Move. He looked at Zora, who was sitting at the low table sketching out the layout of Elias's estate from memory. Her bandaged hands held the pencil with fierce concentration, as if drawing the map could give her power over the place that had caged her for years. She'd been getting stronger each day, the bruises fading from purple to yellow-green, her voice losing that broken gravel quality. But they were out of time. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." She didn't ask questions. That's what he appreciated about her. She understood that hesitation was a luxury neither of them could afford. She gathered the sketches, pulled on the coat he'd bought her from the shop downstairs, and was at the door before he finished wiping down surfaces for prints. They took the back stairs, emerging into an alley that smelled of rotting produce and motor oil. Kang Dae's car was parked 2 blocks away, deliberately distant. They walked fast but not fast enough to draw attention, just another couple in the old district heading somewhere unremarkable. "How did they find us?" Zora asked, her breath misting in the cold morning air. "They didn't." "Not exactly." Kang Dae kept his eyes moving, scanning windows and doorways. "They found the building. Property records, tax filings, utility bills. Elias has access to city databases most people don't even know exist. He's not searching for you specifically, he's searching for me. And you're the leverage he thinks will bring me to the table." Zora stopped walking. "He knows you took me. He knows someone interfered with his filing system." Kang Dae took her elbow, gentle but firm, getting her moving again. In his mind, you're stolen property. He'll use every legal mechanism he has to get you back, and when legal doesn't work, he'll use the mechanisms he keeps hidden in offshore accounts and sealed court documents. They reached the car, a nondescript sedan that could disappear into traffic. Kang Dae drove them out of the old district toward the industrial zone, where warehouses stood empty and cameras were sparse. He had another safe house there, one registered under a shell company even his own lawyers didn't know about. The warehouse was exactly what Zora had expected the first time: concrete floors, high ceilings, the smell of rust and neglect. But Kang Dae had prepared it. There were camping supplies in one corner, a portable heater, bottles of water and military rations. In another corner, covered with a tarp, was something else. He pulled the tarp away to reveal a table with 3 handguns, disassembled and cleaned, along with boxes of ammunition and paper targets. "Elias is hunting leverage," Kang Dae said, checking each weapon with practiced efficiency. "He thinks if he has you, he has me. If he has me, he gets his company back and buries whatever evidence you had. He's not thinking about what you want. He never has." Zora walked to the table, her eyes fixed on the guns. "Teach me. Zora. Teach me how to shoot." She looked at him then, and her eyes carried something that hadn't been there in the safe house. Not just anger or determination, but a cold, clarifying rage. "You said I'm dangerous because I'm still alive. Make me dangerous in ways he can't predict." Kang Dae studied her face. In Tombstone, he'd known people who wanted guns for the wrong reasons, for power, for ego, for the thrill of holding death in their hands. But Zora's request wasn't about power. It was about refusing to ever be helpless again. It was about taking the language of violence Elias had used against her and learning to speak it back. "This isn't like the movies," he said quietly. "A gun doesn't make you safe. It makes you responsible. Every time you pick one up, you're making a choice about who you're willing to become." "I know exactly who I'm willing to become." Zora reached for the smallest pistol, a compact 9mm. "Someone who survives." He spent the next 3 hours teaching her. Stance first, feet shoulder width, knees slightly bent, weight forward. Grip, firm but not strangling, support hand wrapped around the dominant. Sight alignment, trigger control, breathing. Kang Dae had learned these things in Tombstone from men who treated guns like religion, and he taught them to Zora like a meditation, each step deliberate and precise. She was a terrible shot at first. Her hands shook, her breathing was ragged, and she flinched every time the gun barked. But she didn't quit. She loaded and reloaded, adjusted her stance, tried again. By the end of the third hour, she was hitting the paper target more often than not. Not the center, that would take weeks, but the target. Proof that she could make the bullet go where she wanted it. He'll have professional security, Kangdae said as she ejected her magazine, the movements becoming smoother with repetition. Former military, probably. They'll be better trained, faster, more experienced. I don't need to be better than them. Zora set the gun down, her bandaged hands steady now. I just need him to see that I'm not on his list anymore. That I'm not something he can file away or dispose of. That I'm a person who fights back. Kangdae nodded slowly. Then we do this smart. We don't go in shooting. We use what I'm good at, corporate warfare. We take his leverage away piece by piece until he's the one who's exposed and vulnerable. And the guns? Insurance. He began reassembling the weapons, his movements automatic. In case the paper isn't sharp enough. That night, they sat on the cold warehouse floor eating rations and drinking instant coffee, the portable heater casting orange light across their faces. Zora's sketches of the estate were spread between them, marked with notes and entry points. Kangdae had his laptop open, running searches through Elias's corporate structure, looking for weak points. He'll come for us, Zora said, not looking up from the drawings. When he realizes we're planning something, not just hiding, he'll come with everything he has. I know. Kangdae highlighted another subsidiary company, another shell account. Let him. Every move he makes, every resource he exposes, gives us more ammunition. The paper kind and the other kind. Zora smiled, sharp and dangerous. You sound like you're enjoying this. Maybe I am. He closed the laptop, met her eyes across the scattered documents. In Tombstone, I spent 20 years running toward violence. Here, I'm running toward something else. Justice, maybe. Or just making sure one powerful man doesn't get to throw people away without consequences. That's called revenge where I come from, Zora said. Then call it revenge. Kangdae stood, offered her his hand to help her up. But revenge with paperwork and shell companies and property seizures. And maybe, if we're lucky, we won't need the guns at all. They both knew he was lying. Elias wasn't the kind of man who surrendered because of paperwork. But they could hope. And while they hoped, they prepared. The warehouse settled into silence around them, metal creaking in the wind, shadows moving across concrete. Somewhere across the city, Elias was mobilizing his forces, calling in favors, tightening his net. But here, in this forgotten space between the paper and the blade, two people who'd been thrown away were learning how to throw back. The press conference was Kangdae's idea. Not a confrontation in shadows or a shootout at the docks, but something far more dangerous to a man like Elias, sunlight. They scheduled it for noon at the downtown Marriott, sent invitations to every major news outlet, every financial reporter who'd ever written about Elias Mercer's empire. The subject line was simple: corporate fraud and personal crimes, a survivor speaks. Elias arrived 20 minutes early with 6 lawyers and a security detail that looked like they'd been pulled from a mercenary catalog. He stormed through the hotel lobby like he owned it, because in a sense, he did. His company had financed the renovation 3 years ago. But when he reached the conference room, he found the doors locked and a single hotel employee with an apologetic smile and a legal injunction preventing him from entering until the conference began. Kangdae had learned well in Tombstone. Violence was a language, yes, but so was the law. And Elias had taught him that paper could cut just as deep as any blade. Inside the conference room, Zora stood behind a podium adjusting the microphone. She wore a simple black suit that Kangdae had bought her, professional and severe. Her bruises had faded enough that makeup could cover what remained. But she'd chosen not to hide them. The yellow-green marks on her cheekbone, the healing split in her lip, she wanted the cameras to see exactly what her husband had filed under, disposed. You don't have to do this, Kangdae said, though they'd had this conversation a dozen times already. We have enough documentation. The offshore accounts, the blackmail files, the falsified records. I can release everything through my lawyers and keep you out of it. But then I'm still hiding. Zora looked at him, her hand steady on the podium. I've been hiding for 7 years. Behind smiles at charity galas, behind silence in that penthouse, behind the version of myself Elias needed me to be. I'm done hiding. The doors opened and reporters flooded in, cameras and microphones and hungry eyes. Kang Dae moved to the side of the room, close enough to intervene if needed but far enough to let Zora own this moment. His hand rested near his jacket where the compact 9mm waited, just in case Elias's men decided paper wasn't enough. Zora began speaking and her voice didn't shake. She told them everything. The offshore accounts Elias used to hide money from investors and tax authorities. The blackmail files he kept on city officials and business rivals. The network of shell companies that existed only to move money and hide crimes. And then, her voice dropping to something quieter but no less powerful, she told them about the night he'd left her bound and bleeding in the corporate barn, about how he'd looked at her like she was just another item on his list that needed correcting. The room was silent except for the mechanical whisper of cameras. Even the reporters, who'd seen every kind of scandal, seemed stunned by the clinical precision with which she dismantled her husband's empire and exposed his violence. Then the doors burst open. Elias stood there flanked by his lawyers, his face the color of raw meat. "This is defamation," he shouted, but his voice cracked on the second word. "You're lying. You're trying to destroy me because you're bitter about our divorce. We're not divorced." Zora's voice cut through his bluster like a scalpel. "You can't divorce someone you tried to kill. That's called murder, Elias. And thanks to Mr. Kang Dae, I have the security footage from your building proving exactly what you did to me." Kang Dae stepped forward then, pulling a flash drive from his pocket and holding it up for the cameras. "The footage, the financial records, the blackmail files, everything is here. Copies have already been sent to the FBI, the SEC, and the District Attorney's Office. Mr. Mercer, you should probably call a criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one." Elias's face went from red to white. He looked at Zora like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, and realizing she wasn't on his list anymore. She wasn't his wife or his property or his problem. She was the person who'd just dismantled everything he'd built. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I gave you everything. The house, the cars, the life. You gave me a cage." Zora stepped down from the podium, walked right up to him. She was smaller than him by 6 inches but somehow she seemed taller. "And I'm giving myself freedom. That's the difference between us, Elias. You think everything is something you own. I know now that I belong to myself." Security moved in then, not Elias's hired men but actual hotel security, backed by 2 police officers who'd been waiting in the hall. There were warrants, Kang Dae had made sure of that. Financial crimes, assault, attempted murder. The paper had been filed, the blade sharpened, and now the system Elias had used to hurt so many people was finally turning on him. They led him away in handcuffs, his lawyers already barking into phones, and Zora watched him go with eyes that held no satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet kind of peace. The press conference dissolved into chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. Kang Dae guided Zora out through a side exit, his hand on her back, protective but not possessive. They emerged into the afternoon sunlight, and for a moment they just stood there on the sidewalk, breathing the city air. "What happens now?" Zora asked. "The trials will take months, maybe years. The media will never leave us alone. His lawyers will try to bury us in litigation. Let them try." Kang Dae looked at the city spread before them, glass towers and old districts, corporate barns and hidden groceries, all of it existing together in complicated chaos. "I came here to hide from Tombstone. To find a place where I could be someone different. But you taught me something, you don't find that place. You make it." Zora smiled, really smiled, for the first time since he'd found her. "So we stay." "We stay," he agreed. "Not in a safe house or a warehouse. Not hiding. We stay in the open, in this city, and we make it the place we deserve." They walked away from the hotel together, two people who'd been thrown away by men who thought power meant ownership. Behind them, Elias's empire was collapsing, buried under paper and evidence and the testimony of a woman who'd refused to stay silent. Ahead of them was uncertain, trials and threats and the long work of healing. But they walked toward it anyway, choosing freedom over hiding, choosing to live rather than just survive. The city hummed around them, indifferent and beautiful and full of possibility. Somewhere in its streets, there was a place for people like them. People who'd been erased and who'd erased themselves back into existence. They'd find it together, or they'd make it. Either way, they weren't hiding anymore. Thank you for staying with Zora and Kangdae through their journey from darkness into light. This story is about more than survival, it's about the courage it takes to refuse erasure, to stand up when the world tells you to stay down, and to choose freedom even when the cost is everything you have. If this story touched you, if you saw yourself in Zora's refusal to stay silent or in Kangdae's search for redemption, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. Your support helps us tell more stories about people who refuse to be thrown away, about survivors who become warriors, about the quiet revolutions that happen when we choose to be seen. Drop a comment below telling us what this story meant to you, or share your own story of finding freedom. We read every single comment, and your words matter to us. Together, we're building a community of people who believe that no one deserves to be erased, that everyone has the right to reclaim their power, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are not on anyone's list. You belong to yourself.